Good afternoon, Gayle. Thanks for joining.
Hi, Jake. Thanks for having me.
So today, I'm super excited to have you on and chat really quickly about talent strategy, a little bit about human capital management. One thing being in the benefits space that we see, we get this question all the time: how do you find the right talent? Where do you find the right talent? And once you know that group that you want to hire and know those roles that you're hiring for, how do you fill them? And how do you make sure that those individuals develop over the long term? You and I've had a lot of really great conversations together. And so I wanted to invite you out today to chat about what you do, about your career, and then talk about some of those things around talent, around human capital management, around those strategies that can help businesses grow into the future. So I want to start always, of course, introduce yourself, talk a little bit about your career, where you're at, who you are, what you do, what keeps you excited and engaged. We'd love to hear about that.
Okay. Well, thanks. Yeah, my name is Gayle Norton. I am the Vice President of Client Solutions with CMP, Career Management Partners. And CMP is a talent management firm. So we work with companies across the talent lifecycle, from hiring, either executive search and professional level on-demand recruiting, and consulting on talent acquisition strategy. That's the front end piece where I really focus the most. And we also have assessment and development arm, and then an outplacement. So really the entire talent lifecycle, which is, really important to look at how one impacts another. I've been doing this, well, I've been working with CMP since May of last year. But I've been in this arena for many years. And this is an area that, I think talent is just the driving force behind everything. If you don't have the right talent, if you don't find the right talent, if you don't have the right strategy in general and bringing people in, you can't grow your company. And there's so many different areas to look at and so many ways to go. But in general, that's what drives me in this. This, as far as, I haven't always been in the HRTA arena. I have a business background, and actually, before that, I actually started as a nurse. So, there's a lot of different ways that I look at things. Having that business background and being able to look at things a little bit differently really gives a different lens and allows me to look at things from a much broader perspective. So, I utilize all those tools that I have have developed over the years to help me in consulting and in working with clients.
Awesome. I appreciate that introduction. Thanks so much. Again, we hear all the time that this is such a huge arena that is a lot of times overlooked, and there's not a big emphasis put on it. And what really engaged me in doing this little chat with you today, Gayle, is you talk about strategy and how important strategy is. And I think, as you're talking about your background and the consulting work you've done and the diverse organizations you've worked with, I think that helps drive the strategy that you bring to the table. And that really gets us into our first question. We know that COVID has changed the way we do business. We know over the past 11 months, things have changed drastically, specifically in your realm. How has that changed your business? And then what can you tell us looking over the next 6 to 24 months on how that's going to continue to change, and maybe some things that we can do to help mitigate those changes?
Yeah, I think, there's a lot of things that COVID brought up. Some of them really good, actually. Probably the most frequent ones are the remote work, and the digitalization. Going from most companies being on premise, then going to totally not, was a big culture shock for a lot of companies. The good part that came out of that is I think that companies realized that people can be productive, their employees can be productive, and probably are more productive in many cases are more productive by working remotely. And then going from the digitalization of everyone escalated so much. The strategy was there to make things, to digitalize more, but the timeline was much longer. So those are two of the main things that I think happened. Employer branding is another big area. we talked about employer branding before, but it really was kind of nebulous. Now there's really a spike in organizations who are becoming more purpose focused. The social responsibility is a huge issue. That's become at the forefront with DEI. Planning for the future, thinking about the future ways of working and different problem solving. Those are all the things that were escalated in terms of when they needed to be discussed and when they needed to happen, and those will continue, I think, over the next months. And people have settled in. Companies have settled in more to the remote work and the digital aspects and things like that. However, I still think that is going to keep on. And talent, of course, in general, has risen to the top even more. In January, the CEOs ranked talent when they did a study. There was a KPMG study that was done in January of 2020, and they ranked the talent risk. Although high, it was still behind 11 other risks, supply chain, things like that. But since the pandemic started, talent has risen to be one of the most significant threats to their business. The CEOs are saying they see that is one of the aspects that they really need to focus on. And they recognize that losing key employees and attracting the specialized talent can really have a critical impact on their future business performance as well. So there's a lot of different ways to look at talent and the impact and how bringing in the right talent can drive your business. And I think that's the bottom line. People, or especially CEOs, are realizing that talent is their competitive advantage. And the way they bring talent in, the types of talent they bring in, and the retention will really add to their longevity and their profitability.
Very fascinating. Very fascinating. I think that's apparent. I mean, again, we know the economy that we're in right now. There's a huge gap in employment from what there was 12 months ago. Why do you think that has jumped so far up the line of importance for CEOs and executive teams? And what are some of those organizations that are doing it well? What are they doing that's making them do talent well? How does that strategy work for them? And why do so many companies fail at it?
Well, I think in general, some companies haven't looked at their talent acquisition strategy as a whole. A lot of people think of talent strategy, when they hear talent strategy, they think the strategy behind an executive search, for example. And while that is important when you're looking for a particular role, especially a C-level role or a higher level role, executive role, I mean, there's definitely a strategy behind it. But as far as a talent acquisition strategy, talent acquisition is much more than just recruiting. It's really there's a whole foundation. I mean, it starts with employment branding, it goes through the recruiting process, and then through onboarding. So looking at your talent acquisition strategy as a whole is, I think, sometimes why organizations don't do as well, because they don't look at that from end to end. Included in that also is candidate experience. So there's all kinds of things that really need to be looked at. And if organizations haven't looked at them, looked at their strategy or their overall talent acquisition function in a year or something, if they haven't re-engineered their processes, for example, done that kind of thing, they're probably not doing things as well as they could. And the employment branding is, as I mentioned, starts at the very beginning. That has morphed so much, and really, what people are looking for, needs to be included in that in the employment branding side. It needs to be talked about. And a lot of companies, some are just overwhelmed. All of these things that are going on, the remote work, the COVID, I mean, all of that, there's so much to deal with. But I think that's part of it. Another part is, if they haven't connected their talent strategy to their business strategy, looking at what is senior leadership looking for as far as their business goals, and how can recruiting align with those goals, and then talking in business terms, and to executives in general about that. For example, if your organization has some positions open in sales, then it's easy, or it should be communicated that in the need to fill those positions in terms of what the revenue loss would be if they're not filled. It's not the discussion of I just need to fill these open roles. It's what is the bottom line impact, and those are I think TA is becoming better at that. Certainly, the leaders coming in now are talking more in those terms, but that still I think is a big gap.
I think that's a huge point, right? We look at all these different areas of the business, and businesses are in operation to run a profit and generate revenue. How do you, to me, that's the huge, how do you quantify that ROI for your clients specifically? How do you make them believe this is such a huge part of your business and a driving force into the future? What do those numbers look like?
Well, you can look at it in a couple different ways. You can look at it first. You can look at the profits that are lost, because with the revenue, or so, for example, if your organization lost $20 million each year because of unfilled positions, and the company is operating at a 10% profit, then that's a little over $2 million in profits that would be lost because the positions were not filled. You can look at the cost of turnover. And all of these things add in, but the cost of turnover, there's, depending on the role, it ranges from 1.5 to 2 times salary. The non-exempt workers could be half of their salary, their base salary, to up to C-suite could be, between 200 and 250% of their base salary. So that turnover itself, that cost of turnover is entered in. The cost of the open positions. So to give you an example, I did an outline for a client, and this was average sales roles. I mean, they were just general level sales roles. But if the average sales per year for this client was $75,000, if they stayed open if they had one position open for a month, they would lose $6,200 a month. If they had 5 positions open, they lost $31,000 a month. So if you extrapolate that out, if you just have 5 lower level positions that are open for 3 months, that's $100,000. Now, if you look at a higher level salesperson, you could have salespeople bringing in $2.5 million revenue. Things like that. So if you look at it in terms of what the revenue loss is, and then relate that to, because we want to decrease the time to fill, we want to decrease the time to fill or increase our capacity to be able to bring people in more quickly. The revenue loss could be $2.5 million. I need 2 recruiters, or I need to bring in someone to help for X period of time, and then that's the way to one of the ways to quantify it. I mean, the whole impact on bottom line is really, I think that talent acquisition it's usually looked at, HR in general is looked at a non-revenue producing, but when you look at bringing in these people to fill the roles and increase time to productivity, talent acquisition drives a lot of revenue. So,
it makes a lot of sense, and I appreciate you walking through that example and quantifying it. We have a motto. We always talk about hiring great folks around here, and finding good talent is not easy, and especially right now, the market that we're in, the economy that we're in, we're transitioning on how we do business, and I think it's extremely important not only to define a strategy around what's our next steps as an organization around people and talent and hiring, but I think it's just as important to understand what that means from a financial standpoint too, right? That's what gets that conversation up to the C-level and to those executive teams. And understanding that impact is huge for organizations. So I appreciate you sharing. I know we have a couple minutes left. One final question I always love to ask. Again, you've had a very diverse career. You've been doing this for a while. What excites you so much about this industry, and what keeps you staying around?
Well, I think, the fact of how passionate I feel that talent drives business growth. and bringing in, probably better said, is being able to bring in the right talent that will stay, to drive the growth of all businesses. I mean, that's what keeps me in this. It's an exciting part of HR. Talent acquisition is really kind of separate from HR in their approach. But I think that is really what drives me in this. I mean, part of what I do too, part of what we do is, have an interim, supplemental recruiting help for companies. And so, that's one of the other pieces that I see a lot is with all of these things that are going on, and that's part of why I still am in this area, and what keeps me here is, it's ever changing, and the fact of needing to have different strategies if you're going through hiring spikes, or if you have bandwidth constraints or something like that, having those strategies in place to be able to deal with those and respond quickly when a company is faced with that. Those are the types of things that I love to help companies with, love to discuss with them, and and I just really like to have those conversations too.
I love that. Awesome. Very cool. Well, Gayle, I appreciate your time so much today. Before we wrap it up, I want to open up the floor to you. Is there anything you'd like to add? Final notes to the audience, to anybody who's going to watch the video?
Well, I guess the one thing I would say is, take the time to look at your processes, your talent acquisition strategy overall, your processes, look at your employment branding, all the way through to onboarding. It's so important to do that. Some organizations have the bandwidth to do that internally. Some organizations need to, to bring in someone to help them. Whichever way you do it, I think it's critical that it be done so you can lay things out so you're ready for all the changes that are coming, because they will continue to come.
There's no shortage of excitement these days. There's no shortage of change these days. Yes. So I appreciate the advice. I appreciate the time as always, Gayle. Thanks so much for joining in. I've definitely loved getting to know you and hearing about your world and what you do and the importance of it too. So thank you again, and we'll talk soon.
Okay, thanks, Jake.